Hello, good people, and welcome back to our final lesson in Unit 9 and our final lesson in our course. This is Government and Major Issues, Lesson 2, Part 2 on Global Environmental Issues. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so when we talk about environmental issues around the world, the globe that we live on and the physical environment that we live in is definitely an important issue for us to make sure we're discussing and make sure that we are bringing to the attention of government leaders. There are three specific examples that we'll get into with environmental issues overall. So the first one is the Keystone Pipeline. So this is a pipeline that brings oil from Canada, where it is like dredged from the earth and the oil sands in Canada all the way down to the coastlines of Texas and Louisiana. It is literally just a giant pipe with oil flowing through it on a regular basis. It brings, I want to say, 500,000 gallons of oil a day to us from Canada. Over to the U.S. to refineries where the crude oil by itself that is taken from the ground and from the earth is made into other petroleum products and gasoline, and sometimes just shipped in just giant 55-gallon drums of oil over to other countries. So the Keystone Pipeline already exists, much to this dismay of several native tribes here in the U.S. There is supposed to be an XL section, which is literally just the Keystone Pipeline extended edition, I guess. Another section of it to be built and kind of be a little more efficient and a little less time for it to get from Canada to the coast of the U.S. So some past issues with the Keystone Pipeline by itself was continued dependence on Canadian oil spillage and also building on native sacred grounds. So these particular tribes, when the private companies were building the Keystone Pipeline, did not go through the proper channels in order to secure loans and land and permission from these native tribes in order to build this pipeline. And so the natives from, I believe, Sioux, Dakota, Lakota, Blackfoot, Crow, multiple native First Nations tribes were out protesting this particular pipeline. But the XL section specifically in their current issues does not cross as many native sacred grounds. However, it does still cross some of them. It is a new line. It will take more time to build. There are still spillage risks, and there is significant impact on Canadian oil sands. So you're essentially trying to double the amount of output that Canada is already giving us. That's definitely a problem. All right. Our second one is the Kyoto Protocol. So this is the United Nations plan to reduce carbon emissions by the year 2012. Yes, it is the year 2022. However, we do specifically state this because not a single nation that was supposed to significantly reduce their carbon dioxide emissions by 2012 actually met the goal that they had for themselves. The goals themselves and kind of how we were going about meeting these goals had to be completely reevaluated overall. So just our carbon dioxide emissions were right in line with China's. The next one after that is like a third of what we put out. So the United States is the top country for annual emissions for carbon dioxide in metric tons, despite us only being 5% of the world's population in general. So it's definitely an issue for us. All right, the third one is climate change. So this is the gradual increase in Earth's temperature caused by human-made emissions of greenhouse gases. Some current issues with this is our continued heavy reliance on fossil fuels in order to move around, to migrate to different places, to fuel our transportation systems, be they public or private. Another issue is the government's role in legislation about climate change, whether or not the government does want to take an active role in combating and trying to reverse or at least pause the effects of climate change. There is another domino effect of rising sea levels. The Maldives are a set of islands out in the ocean, and they are only 4 feet above sea level. So if our oceans rise another 4 feet, the entirety of the Maldives will be underwater. A country will no longer exist because of the ocean. So just things to consider. Impacts on ecosystems. If our glaciers are not there, polar bears are not going to have anywhere to be. Seals are not going to have anywhere to be. Walruses, all kinds of Arctic wildlife that are losing their habitats, that sort of thing. All right, so in general, this is what our average increase in temperature looks like from the 1950s and the projected change in temperature into the 2090s. Yes, that's far away from now in time. However, there's a strong chance that some of us will still be alive by then, and hopefully we will not be seeing these impacts and these issues. All right, so now that we have gone through our 5 major categories of issues, let's talk about addressing them. So should the government even address major issues? It honestly depends on how you feel about the issue itself. Your opinion might change from point to point, from category to category. Yes, no, maybe, who knows? So for politics and issues, the differences in political parties and leadership can cause significant friction in how things get addressed. For example, in the year 2022, which is currently where we are now at the time of the recording of this video, we are about to head into a midterm election of our presidential term. So in the middle of a presidential term, about a third of Congress, a third of the House, and a third of the Senate, roughly, maybe a little less than that, just depends, will roll over, and those seats are up for re-election or a new election for a new challenger. It just depends. So that can definitely impact how issues are addressed and which specific issues are addressed based on who wants to be in Congress, that sort of thing. The same thing can be said for state and local governments as well. Elections can definitely impact that party leadership inside of Congress that exists, and inside of state and local legislatures as well can do that. Public opinion and public debate can also cause problems in how you give feedback to your legislators and how you want problems to be solved. And then all different levels have different roles in addressing these issues. So if you want, let's say that your issue is taxes and taxation, and you want to reform the tax codes. That's great, but if you call a senator cannot help you with that because they're not in charge of tax codes. You would have to call someone in the House of Representatives. Or even if you called like your state representative and you're like, I'm paying too much money in federal taxes. Well, you've called the wrong level, first of all, in order to be able to solve this problem. So they can't do anything for you. So in terms of addressing issues, you asking the right questions to the right people is how issues can be addressed. All right, we also have to think about the role of media. So bias can impact how and when issues are presented to the public. So, for example, moving into the COVID-19 pandemic, that was all we heard about on the news for about a year. And then roughly a year into the pandemic, you saw less and less stories about the pandemic itself and about hospitalizations, people on ventilators, masks, this, that, and the third, vaccines, all that sort of thing. So just as an example, that can definitely impact how and when you receive information about issues. When you talk about information itself, you need to consider the source. You probably shouldn't be getting all of your info from Facebook. There's a strong chance that you're being lied to. So people don't have to fact check things in order to go on Facebook, and people, even on news outlets, when they do interpret a story and they do tell you something about current events, they're going to tell you with some sort of interpretation and some kind of opinion. All right, so you have to think about the source of your information. So if you want to pause and kind of zoom in or out of these are good places to go. This is an all sides media bias chart to see kind of where your people lean, left or right. In addition, if you look over here at this, I think this is from AP, but I'm not entirely sure. So this one is for sources, where you find them, if they're good sources of news, whether or not they are. If you want to pause and kind of see where you get your news from and where it sits on this particular spectrum, you're welcome to do so. All right. And good people, that has been Unit 9. Congrats, you have finished all the lessons in civics.